What's up, everybody? So today I'll be explaining who you should vote for during this midterm election based on Trump's presidency. So I'm going to be covering a slew of issues from immigration to foreign policy and domestic. First, I'll start with immigration. I'll begin with the counter argument from both sides. Then I'll give my opinion on who you should vote for. So, on the left, the argument that's being made is ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, their role. So this administration has invested billions of dollars into funding ICE, to funding all these operations with mass enforcement, raids, and mass deportations, with Trump passing executive orders like Proclamation 10/888, labeling what's happening at the southern border an invasion. This was designed to suspend the entry of migrants and to allow authorities to bypass formal court hearings to deport undocumented individuals rapidly. But this has faced legal pushback. Federal judges have ruled parts of it unlawful, stating it oversteps constitutional limits. The argument the left is also making, how the right is restricting legal pathways, like legal visas. So this administration has put a policy in place that puts a massive $100,000 fee on employers sponsoring H-1B specialty workers, aimed at curbing foreign tech labor. Now, in my opinion, that's good, but the left wants humane treatment and a fair chance for immigrants to present their cases in front of judges rather than immigrants automatically being deported. So due process, counter argument from the right. Biden let in 3 to 4 million undocumented illegals, meaning this administration would have had to deport to a minimum because the CBP recorded a much higher number of illegals that came in during the Biden administration, like 20 to 25 million almost. But at a minimum, if it was 4 million, Trump's daily rate of immigration would have had to be roughly 2,700 to 3,000 per day. But did this take place? No. The opposite happened. Trump only deported hundreds of people a day, at maximum 1,000, which is closer to the 2,000 number, but not quite. And back in August of last year, 2025, 600,000 Chinese nationals were allowed entry in the U.S. for college. For context, the U.S. is the top destination for Chinese nationals, with approximately 277,000 currently. This administration wants to expand that number, and they have. So the right is noting it as a betrayal of the American people. Now, me personally, I'm not trying to sound like Jim Rich. I'm not trying to promote yellow peril propaganda. I'm just stating the facts. And with the Indians, the U.S. is issuing hundreds of thousands of employment-based temporary foreign worker visas like H-1B and L-1 visas so they can work at companies like Silicon Valley, just to make my example, right? So on immigration, if you're tired of the ICE crackdowns, such as the ones that took place in Minnesota earlier this year, and if you expected more mass deportations, and if you're disappointed or feel betrayed by the MAGA pace, I'd say vote Democrat. Next issue is foreign policy. This is a major one. So Trump ran on no new wars and said he'd end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Of course, this never happened, and his administration opposes Ukraine joining NATO, stating it'll trigger a wider war. And it's basically trying to convince Putin, because that's who the president is close with, to sit at a round table and negotiate with Zelensky. So Ukraine versus Russia is a continuation, not exactly Trump's fault or any president's fault, because Ukraine v. Russia dates back to 2014 when Russia wanted to annex Crimea. It just became a war under Biden in 2022. So I'm not blaming DJT, but he did run on promises made, promises kept, and on wars, if I'm being honest, he hasn't really done a good job at keeping his promises. He's doing better in some areas, but the counter argument is, of course, based on the Middle East, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Iran currently, and what took place earlier this year in the Western Hemisphere with Venezuela. Let's start with that. So Operation Absolute Resolve. To the left, this was a direct violation of international law. They argue launching an unprovoked military extraction of a sitting head of state on sovereign soil bypasses the UN and sets a global precedent, and controlling Venezuela's oil production was the objective of OAR. So the left is also calling it the return of banana wars, resource extraction, etc., etc. Now, that's a valid point. I agree with that. It's definitely imperialism, especially if I'm looking at it from a non-interventionist standpoint. But it was other factors as well that resulted in the U.S. targeting the Maduro regime specifically, like the cartel, the Suns, human rights abuse, fixed elections so Maduro could remain in power, the border dispute with Guyana that resulted in their oil boom. At the time, this had nothing to do with the United States. It was all domestic. But Venezuela's allies are America's adversaries, like China, Russia, and Iran, which made it a target in the region. And the U.S. taking over VZ's oil supply only made oil prices surge. So it did us no good. Plus, Maduro's vice president was installed and forced, for lack of better words, to comply to America's wants, aka giving over their oil and other things. And we invaded VZ on the basis of the Monroe Doctrine, which results in the military buildup in the Caribbean. So the U.S.'s justification of the capture was the 1823 Doctrine, which prevents adversarial foreign influence in the Western Hemisphere. So the right is calling it regional dominance. Another valid point. Our SOS, Marco Rubio, I like him, but there was a proposal in place to prevent what happened in VZ. The State Department allegedly denied it. Why? Because the GOP is controlled by war hawks. And then, of course, you have the Middle East. So the Gaza Peace Plan was drafted in September of last year, a multilateral agreement between Israel and Hamas that aims to address the ongoing conflict around the Gaza Strip. But was it addressed? No. Israel, to this day, bombards both Lebanon and Gaza. Then Iran, of course, weeks after Maduro's capture, the U.S. assisted Israel even a year prior in June 2025. But I'm just talking about February 28th of this year. Israel went after Iran, which resulted in Operation Epic Fury, or should I say Operation APAC Fury. They took down the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The prices of crude oil and Brent oil instantly rise after this. And then it's other things like them wanting to annex Greenland, which is a part of Operation Arctic Endurance, separating Alberta from Canada, the Armenia and Azerbaijan, a peace agreement, etc. But overall, no new wars was a flop. So if you're against the U.S.'s current foreign policy priorities, I say vote Democrat. And last but not least, domestic issues like the economy and other things. Perhaps I'll just talk about the economy. As a result of our foreign policy focus our economy has been affected at home. Prices have tripled, mainly gas at the pump. Gas is nearly at $4. And the tariffs, the left has challenged Trump on that. Trump is using the IEPA to bypass Congress and levy Liberation Day tariffs on international trading partners. Federal courts have ruled portions of the IEPA tariffs illegal. Plus, Trump replaced NAFTA with the USMCA, which benefits our neighbors like Canada and Mexico more than it benefits the US. And tariffs affect costs at home, like in the energy sector. But you also got to look at the prices before the war in Iran. Gas was starting to go down, so I'll give Trump credit on that. But overall, economically, I say vote Democrat. That's, of course, if you're looking at trade. Now, I'm going to go back to promises made, promises kept. So, this administration promised to prosecute the Epstein class to the highest extent of the law. And they also promised to release all the Epstein files. Now, some of the files have been released, but the DOJ is withholding 3 million of those files. And instead of prosecuting Epstein's associates, this administration is using the DOJ to prosecute Trump's opponents. And election sites based on what happened in 2020. Then you have the anti-weaponization fund, which has been scrapped. So overall on this, vote Democrat if you want to see justice, or vote Republican if you want more of the files released. To conclude, vote for who you want to vote for. In my personal experience, I don't vote, but everyone has their opinion. I'm here to influence it or the voting process. I stand with Trump overall, but of course there's disagreements from both sides, so I try to keep it balanced. But I do command you, anyone who's watching or listening to this video, to keep up with what's going on and make the right decision. And that decision doesn't have to be right versus left. But I love y'all. Stay blessed. I'm out.